Mrs. Brown's family handbook. And basically it was how to rear and make sure that your family is dysfunctional, because it's important that your family is dysfunctional. You don't want to come from an ordinary family.
Few shows have shaken up British television quite like Mrs. Brown's Boys. What started as a stage play grew into a global hit, winning awards, pulling massive Christmas ratings and filling arenas across the UK and beyond. But while fans laughed at the bloopers, the chaos, and Brendan O'Carroll's quick wit, something far more disturbing was happening behind the scenes. One by one, core cast members left the show, some for deeply personal reasons, others because of conflicts that couldn't be resolved. And each departure revealed a side of Mrs. Brown's Boys that the world wasn't ready to see. The birth of Mrs. Brown's Boys. When Mrs. Brown's Boys first landed on television, it was nothing short of a revolution. British comedy was known for its sharp writing and polished delivery, but here was a show that seemed to rip up the rule book entirely. It wasn't afraid to laugh at itself, it wasn't afraid to be messy, and it certainly wasn't afraid to let the audience in on the joke. Viewers tuned in by the millions, making it one of the BBC's biggest comedy successes of the decade. But while the laughter rolled across living rooms and the cast looked like one big happy family, there were things happening behind the curtain that most fans never imagined. And when certain cast members eventually walked away, the reasons weren't always what people expected. The idea behind Mrs. Brown's Boys began long before the 2011 television debut. Brendan O'Carroll, a stand-up comedian and writer from Dublin, had already been shaping the world of Agnes Brown through his stage plays and a series of books. In these early productions, the character of Mrs. Brown was already making audiences laugh with her blunt humor, sharp tongue, and everyday wisdom. The stage shows, often performed in smaller theaters, had a loyal following, and by the time television came calling, Brendan had spent years building the world that would later explode onto screens across the globe. What gave the show its unique identity was how much of Brendan's own life he poured into it. He didn't just create a sitcom, he brought in his closest circle to help tell the story. His wife, Jennifer Gibney, played Kathy Brown, Agnes's daughter. His sister, Eilish O'Carroll, took on the role of Winnie McGugan, Agnes's loyal but scatterbrained neighbor. His son, Danny O'Carroll, became Buster Brady, one of the show's funniest and most recognizable characters. Even close friends were pulled into the cast. This family-based casting gave the show a kind of chemistry that was impossible to fake. On screen, the characters bickered, laughed, and made mistakes. And off-screen, that same closeness gave the show its heart. From the very beginning, Mrs. Brown's Boys didn't play by traditional sitcom rules. Brendan made the unusual decision to leave bloopers in the final cut. If a cast member forgot a line, stumbled through a scene, or even broke down laughing, it stayed in. The show also broke the fourth wall constantly. Agnes might suddenly turn to the camera and address the viewers directly, reminding everyone that they were part of the fun. The live studio audience, whose laughter was never toned down or replaced, added another layer of energy. And the result was a show that felt chaotic in the best way, and fans embraced it instantly. This gamble paid off in a massive way, because the show quickly became one of the most watched comedies in the UK, pulling in millions of viewers per episode. Christmas specials became a national tradition, dominating holiday schedules and gathering families around the television. Mrs. Brown's Boys even won BAFTA awards, cementing its place in British comedy history. But its reach didn't stop there. The show found unexpected success abroad, especially in Australia, Canada, and South Africa, where viewers connected with its universal humor and unpolished charm. One of the most surprising parts of the show's story is that Brendan himself never intended to play Agnes Brown. The original plan was for a woman to take the role, but when the actress couldn't make it to the recording, Brendan stepped in temporarily. However, what was supposed to be a short-term fix became permanent, and Brendan's version of Agnes, complete with wigs, dresses, and sharp one-liners, became the heart of the series. In fact, over time, fans couldn't imagine anyone else in the role. Continuity also came from cast members who had been with Brendan since the stage days. Rory Cowan, who played Rory Brown, had been part of the character's story since the 1990s. long before television fame arrived. His long involvement gave the show a sense of history, as if audiences were stepping into a world that had been lived in for decades rather than something newly created for the BBC. It all came together to create a sitcom that looked effortless, even though years of work and experimentation had gone into shaping it. For audiences, Mrs. Brown's Boys was a breath of fresh air, something different, fun, and unpredictable. But while viewers were laughing at the outrageous antics on screen, things were much less simple once the cameras stopped rolling. Because behind the bright lights, roaring laughter, and international fame, the cast and crew faced pressures and challenges that threatened the harmony of Brendan's family project. And when those struggles started spilling into the open, it became clear that not everyone would stay part of Mrs. Brown's Boys forever. Behind-the-scenes challenges. For audiences, Mrs. Brown's Boys looked like a chaotic comedy where every slip-up was part of the charm, and every episode felt like an invitation to sit in on a family gathering. But behind the curtain, the reality was much tougher. The laughter on screen often masked long hours, creative disagreements, and the toll of keeping up with a show that had grown into a global phenomenon. As the series expanded beyond the TV studio into live tours and annual specials, the pressure only grew heavier, and it started to show on the people who brought the characters to life. One of the biggest challenges was the touring schedule. What began as a way to connect with fans outside the television broadcast quickly became a relentless routine. The cast crisscrossed the UK and Ireland with packed schedules, often performing multiple shows a week. The live productions were hugely successful, selling out arenas and keeping audiences entertained. But for the people on stage, it was exhausting. Touring meant weeks away from home and missing birthdays, anniversaries, and other important family milestones. What might have seemed like a dream job to outsiders was, in reality, a heavy commitment that strained personal lives. But that wasn't the only problem, because the show also faced creative pressure. Brendan O'Carroll was not only the star of the show, but also its creator, writer, and driving force.
You bring this up at every family gathering. You ruined your father's funeral with this.
His control over the scripts and production meant that every detail went through him. This tight grip ensured consistency and kept the show true to his vision, but it also left limited space for other cast members to shape their characters or influence storylines. For some, this structure worked perfectly because Brendan's formula was clearly successful and the audience loved it. But for others, it created frustrations. With so little room for improvisation or creative input, some actors began to feel like they were passengers rather than collaborators in the project. The production style added another layer of difficulty. Unlike many sitcoms that rely on multiple takes and post-production polish, Mrs. Brown's Boys was filmed in front of a live studio audience with minimal retakes. That meant the pressure was always on, timing had to be perfect, and the energy needed to stay high from start to finish. The format rewarded quick wit and confidence, but it also demanded a lot from the cast. Mistakes weren't hidden, they were embraced as part of the humor. While audiences loved this spontaneity, the cast carried the weight of knowing that almost anything that happened on stage might end up on screen forever. Unfortunately, the emotional toll of this pace eventually became too difficult to ignore. Annual Christmas specials, which were among the show's most watched events, created extra stress for the cast. These episodes were high-stakes productions, designed to meet the enormous expectations of fans who made Mrs. Brown's Boys a holiday tradition. However, behind the laughter and festive set designs, the cast often battled fatigue and burnout. Performing under those circumstances, especially year after year, wore people down. Brendan himself wasn't immune to the strain. As the show's leader, he carried the heaviest workload, including acting, writing, producing, and steering the creative direction. While his energy seemed limitless on screen, off-screen he dealt with his own health concerns and the weight of keeping the entire machine running. For someone who had started with small stage plays, the transformation into a worldwide comedy brand came with pressure that never really let up. All of these factors combined to create an environment that was far more demanding than the audience ever saw. The joy that filled living rooms around the world was real, but it came at a cost. And when the pressure grew too heavy, it didn't just cause tension within the cast. it spilled into controversies that made their way into headlines. These controversies would ultimately help explain why some of the most familiar faces decided to walk away from Mrs. Brown's Boys. The controversies that followed the show. For years, Mrs. Brown's Boys projected the image of a wholesome, feel-good sitcom. Families gathered around the TV at Christmas, laughing at Agnes Brown's cheeky one-liners, and the show's slapstick energy seemed untouchable. But behind that image, controversies began to surface. One of the most damaging incidents came in the form of a racist joke scandal. During rehearsals for a Christmas special, Brendan O'Carroll reportedly made what was later described as a clumsy attempt at humor, one where a racial term was implied. While it may not have been intentional malice, the timing and phrasing sparked immediate backlash. A junior producer was so offended that they reportedly walked out of the show altogether, creating a scene that quickly spread beyond the studio walls. The fallout was serious. Critics accused the BBC of being careless for allowing a work environment that many considered offensive. It got so bad that the network had to pause production to address and investigate the situation. Brendan eventually issued an apology, acknowledging that the attempt at humor had been poorly handled. But by then, the damage was done. The incident left a stain on the show's reputation, forcing audiences to reckon with the fact that even a family-friendly comedy could stumble into territory that was anything but funny. And this wasn't the only storm brewing. Behind the scenes, whispers of feuds began to make their way into the press. In particular, rumors of tension between Brendan and actor Gary Hollywood surfaced, hinting at disagreements that went beyond creative choices. For years, Brendan had cultivated the image of Mrs. Brown's Boys as a family project, with relatives and close friends making up much of the cast. But when friction arose, it clashed hard against that narrative. While the details of those disputes would become clearer later, the rumors alone were enough to suggest that all was not as harmonious backstage as it seemed on screen. At the same time, the show faced growing waves of public criticism. What had once been celebrated as bold, outrageous comedy was now being reassessed through a modern lens. Some critics argued that the humor was outdated, leaning too heavily on stereotypes and slapstick that no longer resonated with younger audiences. Others went further, accusing the show of being offensive in ways that couldn't be excused as casual jokes. The show had once pulled in record-breaking viewership, but suddenly its shift in perception was stark. Brendan O'Carroll, never one to shy away from defending his work, pushed back firmly. His response was blunt. Mrs. Brown's Boys was not designed to be politically correct. In his view, the comedy was supposed to be raw, unfiltered, and above all, funny. While this attitude won him support from fans who saw the show as a breath of fresh air in a culture that had grown overly sensitive, it also further alienated those who believed the show needed to evolve or risk becoming irrelevant. Sadly, these controversies combined to chip away at the seemingly perfect facade of Mrs. Brown's Boys. What had begun as a grassroots stage success turned TV juggernaut was now also a lightning rod for criticism. And for the people involved in the show, it became increasingly difficult to separate the laughter on screen from the tension off it. As the years went on, the controversies didn't just hover in the background. They influenced the decisions of key cast members, some of whom decided they could no longer continue under the strain. And when the first departure came, it sent shockwaves through fans who had always believed the show was as close-knit as the family it portrayed. Rory Cowan. Few characters on Mrs. Brown's Boys lit up the stage quite like Rory Brown, Agnes's flamboyant hairdresser son, played by Rory Cowan. From his campy wit to his sharp comedic timing, Cowan became a fan favorite almost instantly. His larger-than-life persona balanced perfectly against Brendan O'Carroll's quick-fire delivery, giving the show some of its most iconic laughs. For many viewers, Rory wasn't just another character. He was a vital part of what made Mrs. Brown's Boys so vibrant, memorable, and unique. That's why his sudden departure in 2017 sent shockwaves through the fan base. People had grown so accustomed to seeing him at the heart of the family chaos that it seemed unthinkable he'd ever walk away. Yet, as it turned out, the decision had been building quietly behind the scenes for years. Cowan later admitted that for nearly 2 years before his exit, he had been deeply unhappy. Touring with the show across Ireland, the UK, and beyond came with relentless demands, and he often found himself exhausted by the endless travel, performances, and press commitments. What the audience saw on stage was joy, laughter, and energy, but backstage, Cowan was struggling with dissatisfaction. He confessed he hadn't been happy for about 18 to 24 months before he finally made the choice to leave. The breaking point came when his personal life collided with the pressures of the job. During one particularly demanding tour, Cowan's mother was ill, and he found himself unable to spend the time with her that he desperately wanted. The reality hit hard because while he was performing in front of thousands, his family life was slipping through his fingers. Sadly, missing those moments created a strain that no amount of applause or laughter could ease. Unlike some of the later departures, Cowan's decision wasn't rooted in feuds, money disputes, or dramatic clashes. He left simply because he was unhappy, and he knew he couldn't keep going without sacrificing more of himself. For fans, it was a bittersweet farewell. Many respected his honesty and understood his need to prioritize personal happiness, while others felt his absence immediately when watching later specials. His character had been woven into the very fabric of the Brown family, and replacing him, no matter how carefully, was never going to be easy. Cowan himself later spoke openly about the relief he felt once he left. Though grateful for the years he spent with the show and the fame it brought him, he didn't miss the grind or the emotional strain. Still, his leaving marked a turning point. For the first time, viewers realized that even those closest to Brendan O'Carroll and the family dynamic of the show could choose to walk away. It cracked the illusion of permanence and hinted that all was not as stable behind the curtain as it looked on screen. And while Rory Cowan's exit was rooted in personal reasons, what followed with other cast members was far more complicated. Because soon after, another actor's decision to leave sparked headlines, whispers of tension, and questions about what was really going on behind the laughter. Gary Hollywood's exit in 2020 truly shook the foundation of the series. For nearly 2 decades, Hollywood had been a familiar face on the program, playing Dino Doyle, Rory's partner, the dry-witted, sharp-tongued counterbalance to Rory's flamboyance. Together, the pair became more than just comic relief. They represented one of the show's most important dynamics, bringing queer community visibility to a mainstream British sitcom in a way that was both playful and warmly accepted by audiences. Hollywood's contribution to the show stretched back to the early stage versions in the 1990s. Over the years, Dino evolved into a fan favorite, his deadpan delivery playing perfectly against the chaos Agnes brought into every scene. Where Rory often sparkled with camp energy, Dino grounded the humor with biting sarcasm and cutting looks that spoke louder than words. The chemistry between the two characters felt natural and authentic, adding another layer to the family atmosphere that Brendan O'Carroll had worked so hard to build. But behind the laughter, things were starting to fracture. For Hollywood, the warning signs began with the Christmas specials, the crown jewel of the series, which drew in millions of viewers each year. These episodes were considered the highlight of the Mrs. Brown's Boys calendar, but Hollywood reportedly felt that his role was shrinking year after year. Where once he had delivered some of the show's sharpest punchlines, he found himself pushed more to the sidelines, appearing less frequently and with fewer lines. To many, it might have looked like a minor shift, but for an actor who had invested decades of his career in the show, it stung deeply. The problem only grew when pay disparity entered the picture. Reports surfaced that Hollywood and other supporting cast members were being paid less than their colleagues for the same work, particularly for appearances in the specials. While Brendan O'Carroll insisted that all contracts were fair, Hollywood privately grew frustrated with what he perceived as unequal treatment. To him, it wasn't just about money, it was about respect and recognition. After years of loyalty and consistency, he felt undervalued in a show that was still reaping massive success at the box office and in ratings. The unfortunate situation came to a head in 2020, when Hollywood entered into a legal dispute with the show's production company, claiming unfair treatment and pay issues. Unlike Rory Cowan, who had quietly bowed out without acrimony, Hollywood's departure was abrupt and entangled in controversy. Viewers who tuned into later specials immediately noticed Dino's absence, and speculation spread rapidly. Was it a feud? Was he pushed out? Or had the weight of legal and financial disagreements finally become too heavy to ignore? Hollywood himself didn't stay entirely silent. While careful not to publicly disparage Brendan O'Carroll or the rest of the cast, he made it clear that his exit was not on amicable terms. Just like that, the once united family image of Mrs. Brown's Boys began to look a little cracked, and for the first time, audiences saw evidence that the behind-the-scenes tensions hinted at in tabloids might have been real. His departure also brought to light a broader problem facing the show. There were concerns about how to maintain the show's sense of unity when some of its longest-serving cast members were leaving under clouds of dissatisfaction or dispute. Dino and Rory's partnership had provided a much-loved comedic subplot that grounded the show's humor in something more tender, and without it, some fans argued, the heart of the series felt a little weaker. For Gary Hollywood, though, the decision was final. After decades of performing alongside Brendan O'Carroll and his close-knit circle of family and friends, he walked away because the conditions behind the scenes had made it impossible to stay. What had once been a dream role in a wildly successful sitcom had, by the end, become a source of frustration and resentment. But Hollywood's wasn't the last shocking departure, because not long after, another familiar face, who had been there from the beginning, would also choose to walk away, revealing that the cracks inside Mrs. Brown's Boys were far deeper than anyone realized. Fiona O'Carroll. As the daughter of Brendan O'Carroll, Fiona had grown up surrounded by the world her father built. And when the show transitioned from stage to television, she naturally stepped into the role of Maria Brown, Dermot's wife and Agnes's long-suffering daughter-in-law. While other characters sparred with Agnes through wild antics or witty comebacks, Maria played the straight woman, anchoring the comedy with realism and grounding the family chaos in a touch of normalcy. Her presence was subtle but vital. In a show that thrived on outlandish gags, bloopers left in for laughs, and slapstick humor, Maria provided a balance. She was the calm center in the storm, the character that audiences could relate to, and the voice of reason when things spiraled into absurdity. For years, Fiona delivered that balance effortlessly, helping the show feel like more than just a string of punchlines. But as much as Mrs. Brown's Boys was about family on screen, it was just as complicated off it. Fiona's personal life became entwined with her work in a way that made things increasingly difficult. She had been married to Martin Delaney, who played Dermot, her on-screen husband. At first, this real-life partnership mirrored the close-knit dynamic that Brendan had fostered throughout the cast. But when Fiona and Martin divorced, the separation didn't just impact their family, it sent ripples through the show. Suddenly, Fiona found herself having to work daily with her ex-husband, playing a couple still very much together in the sitcom's world. It wasn't just awkward, it was emotionally draining. Every scene required her to tap into the chemistry they once shared, while privately they were navigating the pain of a broken marriage. For some time, she managed to carry on, showing professionalism and commitment to the role. But the strain of blending her personal heartbreak with her professional responsibilities began to take a toll. Touring made it even harder. The grueling schedules of Mrs. Brown's Boys live shows meant spending long stretches in close quarters with castmates, including Martin. For Fiona, the experience became less about performing and more about enduring. While audiences laughed at Maria and Dermot's comedic exchanges, Fiona herself was grappling with the reality that their on-screen family life no longer reflected her own. By the mid-2020s, she began to quietly step back. Fiona reduced her involvement in tours and gradually distanced herself from the high-pressure environment of the specials. Though her exit wasn't accompanied by the same controversy or headlines that followed Gary Hollywood, fans still noticed her absence. For Brendan O'Carroll, losing his daughter from the show must have been bittersweet. She had been part of the dream since its earliest days, helping cement the image of Mrs. Brown's Boys as a genuine family project. But her decision also underlined how fragile that image could be when real life collided with fiction. Fiona's exit is also closely tied to one final piece of the puzzle, because when she stepped back, attention shifted to Martin Delaney, the man who had shared not only her real-life marriage but also her on-screen life as Dermot. Martin Delaney, Martin Delaney's place in Mrs. Brown's Boys was never hard to spot. As Dermot Brown, Agnes's son, he was often the one stuck in ridiculous costumes, thrown into outlandish schemes, or delivering the kind of slapstick humor that had audiences roaring with laughter. Where other characters sparred with Agnes through sharp dialogue, Dermot brought the physical comedy through pratfalls, awkward disguises, and wide-eyed reactions that made him one of the show's most endearing figures. But behind the silliness, Martin's journey was far more complex. For years, he balanced his role on the show with his real-life marriage to Fiona O'Carroll, who played his on-screen wife, Maria. Their partnership made sense both on stage and off, and it gave their characters a genuine chemistry that audiences picked up on immediately. Yet when their marriage ended, the dynamics on set inevitably changed. Like Fiona, Martin had to act out the life of a married couple every day, even as the reality behind the scenes was far different. And the strain of maintaining that illusion eventually became too much. At the same time, Martin was beginning to feel the pull of other creative ambitions. He had been part of the show since its early days, but after years of touring and specials, he grew eager to stretch himself as an actor. Comedy was his bread and butter, but Martin wanted to explore other roles and step beyond the slapstick world of Dermot Brown. When Martin stepped away, it marked another turning point for Mrs. Brown's Boys. Dermot had been a central part of the family chaos from the very beginning, and losing him meant rethinking how the character would be portrayed moving forward. His exit showed once again how closely the show's on-screen family was tied to the realities of the people who played them, and how those realities could not always be contained within the sitcom's world. Martin Delaney had given the show some of its funniest and most chaotic moments, and when he chose to pursue other paths, it was with the hope of carving out a new chapter in his career, revealing how deeply personal choices shaped the fate of one of Britain's most surprising sitcom successes. Which cast member's departure from the show shocked you the most? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you love juicy deep dives into celebrity lives, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new video.